The fine-grained leather of the bill folder felt slick beneath Leah's trembling fingers. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the otherwise hushed symphony of the dining room. It was just a bill. Just a slip of paper itemizing the cost of aged steak and a bottle of wine she could never afford. But beneath the polite total, her pen had scrawled a warning, the ink a dark stain against the pristine white. "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." She had seen it happen 100 times, the quiet language of men who lived by different rules. She was just the waitress, overlooked, invisible, a fixture like the salt shakers or the dim, flattering lights. People talked in front of her as if she were furniture. And tonight she had listened. She had watched the two men at the corner table, their untouched plates growing cold. She had noted the way they never looked at their host, the man whose bill she now held, but instead scanned the room, their eyes lingering on the exits. However, it was the man sitting alone at the bar who had confirmed her fear. He was pretending to watch the game on the television, but his reflection in the mirror behind the bar told a different story. His gaze was fixed on the back of the man in the expensive suit. His right hand, resting on the bar, twitched every few seconds, a nervous tick that drew his jacket just enough to reveal the hard line of something tucked into his waistband. Now, she placed the folder on the table, her movements practiced and smooth despite the terror coiling in her gut. The man did not look up. He was all quiet stillness and expensive tailoring, a predator at rest. His name was Dante Moretti, a name she knew only because he was a regular, a man who commanded the best table and the deepest silence without ever raising his voice. He reached for the folder, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. The contact was like a static shock, cold and electric. He opened it. She watched his eyes, dark and unreadable, scan the bill. They paused on her frantic script. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. The air grew thick, heavy. She expected him to look up, to show some flicker of alarm or confusion. He did not. His expression remained a mask of carved indifference. But his stillness changed. It went from relaxed to absolute, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. He closed the folder, his movements economical and precise. Then he looked at her. It was not a glance. It was an assessment, a weighing. He saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. The slightly too tight uniform, the flushed cheeks, the way she held her breath. His eyes held hers for a beat, and in that single moment, she felt pinned, exposed. He gave no sign of acknowledgement, no nod, no flicker of gratitude. He simply slid a black credit card from his wallet and placed it inside the folder. Then he pushed it back toward her. An order. Finish the transaction. Act normal. Leah's training kicked in. She took the folder, her body moving on autopilot. She turned away from the table, her legs feeling like lead. Every step toward the register was a lifetime. She could feel his eyes on her back, a physical weight. The men at the corner table were watching, too. The man at the bar had stopped twitching. He was waiting. She ran the card. The machine chimed its approval. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the receipt. She signed his name with a forged, looping signature, a trick every waitress knew for regulars who couldn't be bothered. Then she had to go back to the table where death was a silent guest. As she approached, Dante was speaking to his own dinner companion, a man who had been silent all night. His voice was low, a calm murmur. He gestured with one hand, a casual, dismissive motion that somehow managed to knock his wine glass. Red liquid bloomed across the white tablecloth like a sudden wound. "Clumsy of me," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be an apology and a command. It was the perfect distraction. The manager scurried over, cloths in hand. Other diners glanced over, annoyed at the minor disruption. In that brief moment of chaos, Dante's companion was on his feet. The man at the bar began to stand. But Dante was faster. He rose, not with panic, but with a fluid grace that was terrifying. He placed a hand on the small of Leah's back, firm and possessive. "Show me to the kitchens," he murmured. his voice a low growl meant only for her. "There's a service exit." It wasn't a request. She had no choice. His touch was a brand, steering her away from the mess, away from the dining room. She moved, her feet stumbling over the plush carpet. She could feel the tension behind them, a coiled spring about to snap. They passed through the swinging doors into the chaotic, clattering world of the kitchen. The air was hot, thick with the smell of garlic and grease. "Through the back," he commanded, his hand never leaving her. They navigated the maze of stainless steel counters and sweating line cooks. He moved as if he owned the space, his presence silencing the usual kitchen banter. They reached the heavy metal door of the service exit. He pushed it open, revealing a dark, rain-slicked alley that smelled of garbage and wet asphalt. A black sedan was idling silently at the end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the gloom. For a moment, she thought he would let her go, that he had just used her as a shield, a piece of anonymous cover to make his escape. She believed she had done her part and could now melt back into the night. But as his companion climbed into the front seat, Dante's grip on her tightened. He didn't release her. He didn't thank her. He pushed her forward, toward the open rear door of the car. "Get in," he said. The words were flat, absolute. "What? No, I have to work," she stammered. The first protest she had managed all night. It sounded weak, ridiculous. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply bundled her into the back of the car as if she were a parcel, his strength effortless. He followed her in, the scent of his cologne, something dark like cedar and leather, filling the enclosed space. The door slammed shut with a heavy, final thud, plunging them into a world of tinted windows and conditioned silence. The locks clicked. She had believed she was a temporary shield. But as the car accelerated smoothly out of the alley, leaving the restaurant and her entire life behind, she understood her mistake. She wasn't a shield. She was a witness. And in his world, witnesses did not get to go home. The ride was silent. Leah sat rigid, pressed against the door, trying to make herself as small as possible. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, painting fleeting streaks of color across Dante's impassive face. He hadn't looked at her since they got in the car. He stared straight ahead, his hands resting on his knees, perfectly still. The silence was a living thing, a heavy blanket that smothered thought. It was more frightening than shouting, more terrifying than the muffled pop she thought she'd heard as they pulled away. They drove for what felt like an eternity, finally descending into a private underground garage. The gate rolled shut behind them with a grim finality. They were led from the car into a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The space was vast and empty, all glass and steel and shades of gray. It was less a home than a monument to wealth and isolation, with a panoramic view of the city that felt like a judgment. He finally spoke, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Sit." He gestured to a severe-looking black leather sofa. Leah obeyed, perching on the edge of the cushion. He remained standing, looming over her. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, tossing it onto a chair. In his white shirt and tailored trousers, he looked no less dangerous. If anything, the removal of the formal layer made the predatory grace of his movements more obvious. "How did you know?" he asked. His tone was not curious. It was demanding. Leah swallowed, her throat dry. "I'm a waitress. I see things. The men you were with, they weren't your friends. They didn't eat. They watched the room. Many people watched the room. Not like that," she insisted, finding a sliver of courage. "They were looking for an exit strategy. And the man at the bar, his jacket, it didn't hang right, and he kept touching it." She explained the reflection in the mirror, the twitch in his hand. She laid out her observations like pieces of a puzzle, her voice gaining confidence as she focused on the facts, on the professional competence that was her only armor. He listened without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on her. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. He walked to the wall of windows, his back to her, and looked out at the glittering cityscape below. "You are observant," he said. The words a simple statement of fact, devoid of praise. What is your name? Leah. He turned. Leah. You have become a complication. He didn't need to explain. She understood perfectly. The men from the restaurant, whoever they were, now knew a waitress had helped him escape. She was a loose end, a liability. The next few days bled into one another. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Dante was rarely there, but one of his men, a silent giant named Sal, was always present, a human wall between her and the outside world. She ate meals she didn't order from a kitchen she wasn't allowed to use. She slept in a guest room with sheets that felt like silk and a door that had no lock. Yet she knew she was as trapped as if she were behind steel bars. On the third day, Dante returned. He found her in the main living area, staring out the window. He looked tired, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, a harshness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He didn't speak, just walked to the bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. Leah watched him, her fear slowly being replaced by a strange, numb curiosity. He was a puzzle she couldn't help but try to solve. My brother Luca, he said suddenly, his back still to her. The sound of his voice made her jump. He was like you. He saw things, details, but he was too trusting. He believed in the good of people he knew were bad. He turned, swirling the liquor in his glass. His eyes were distant, focused on a memory she couldn't see. He vouched for a man, brought him into our family, told me he was solid. I had my doubts. The man was too eager, too loud. But Luca insisted. He saw potential. He didn't see the greed. He took a slow drink. The man betrayed us, sold information to a rival. Luca went to meet him to fix it. He still believed he could talk him around. He walked into an ambush. Dante's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but the grip he had on his glass was white-knuckled. He died because he missed one detail, and I let him. I trusted his judgment over my own. He fell silent. Leah didn't know what to say. The story was a stone dropped into the quiet pool of the room, the ripples spreading out to touch everything. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a confession of a wound that would never heal. It was the reason he was so cold, so controlled. He was a man who had paid the ultimate price for a single miscalculation. He walked over to where she stood, stopping just a few feet away. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. He was studying her again, but this time it was different. It was as if he were looking for something. You saw what my men missed, he said. It wasn't an accusation. I wasn't looking for a traitor, she replied softly. I was just watching the customers. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint, lingering scent of his cologne mingling with the whiskey on his breath. He reached out, his fingers tracing a line along her jaw, a touch so light it was barely there. Her breath hitched. His thumb brushed against her lower lip. Leah, he said, and the way he spoke her name was a brand. It was low and rough, a claim. It severed her from the waitress with the name tag and remade her into someone who belonged to this moment, to this man. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. She should have pulled away. She should have been terrified. But she didn't move. She couldn't. She was caught in the gravity of his gaze, in the silent, dangerous promise of his touch. He held her gaze for a long moment before dropping his hand, the spell breaking. He turned away, picking up a phone from the counter. He made a call, his voice switching to clipped, hard tones. Leah stood frozen, the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. When he hung up, his expression was grim. They know about you. Who? The Falcone family. The men from the restaurant. They don't have a name or a face, but they know a waitress was involved. They are checking every high-end restaurant in the city. He walked to a sleek, minimalist desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the polished surface. This is $10,000, he said. Enough to get you out of the city, to start over somewhere no one knows you. Sal will drive you to the bus station. From there, you're on your own. It was an exit, a chance. The smart thing to do was to take the money and run, to disappear and never look back, to forget his touch, the story of his brother, the cold weight of his world. She could almost taste freedom. But she thought of the Falcons, faceless men hunting for a ghost. She imagined herself in some strange city, looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life, waiting for a past she hadn't chosen to catch up with her. She looked at Dante, at the unyielding certainty in his eyes. He was a monster, a killer, but he was a known danger. Out there was an unknown one. She pushed the envelope back across the desk. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They'll find me. My only chance is with you." Dante stared at her, his expression unreadable. She had just refused freedom. She had chosen the cage. He didn't look pleased or relieved. He looked intrigued. Her choice had a direct and immediate consequence. She had just declared her allegiance. And in his world, allegiance was a blood oath. She had just bound herself to him, and there was no going back. Her refusal hung in the air between them, a decision that irrevocably altered the landscape of her life. Dante's expression was a mask of cold control, but Leah saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, unsettling assessment. He was recalibrating, seeing her not as a problem to be disposed of, but as a piece on the board he had not anticipated. "Staying here is not the safe choice," he said, his voice a low warning. "Neither is leaving," she countered, her own resolve surprising her. From that moment, everything shifted. The pretense of her being a temporary guest evaporated. She was no longer confined to the guest room. She was simply there, a silent shadow in his sterile penthouse. He began to work from the apartment, taking meetings at the massive dining table with men whose quiet deference was more intimidating than any overt threat. Leah stayed out of sight, but she listened. She learned the names of his capos, the territories they controlled, the simmering tensions with the Falcone family. She absorbed the rhythm of his world, the constant, humming threat that lay just beneath the surface of their luxurious existence. The danger escalated. A car belonging to one of Dante's top men was bombed. A shipment was hijacked at the docks. The Falcones were not just sending a message. They were declaring war, and their attacks were growing bolder, more personal. The penthouse, once a fortress, began to feel like a target. The close call came on a Tuesday. Dante had to attend a meeting, one he couldn't conduct from home. He was leaving her with Sal, but something in his gut, some primal instinct, made him change his mind at the last second. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her with him. "You're coming," was all he said. They took the private elevator down to the garage. The moment the doors slid open, Leah knew something was wrong. The air was too still. One of the overhead lights was out, casting a long, deep shadow over their path to the car. Dante felt it too. His body went rigid, his hand moving instinctively to the small of his back. He pushed her behind him, his body a solid shield. "Stay close," he hissed. They moved toward the sedan, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Then, from the darkness, two figures emerged, guns raised. The eruption of gunfire was deafening, the flashes of light blinding. Dante shoved her down behind a thick concrete pillar, returning fire with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. The sound of bullets ricocheting off concrete was a sharp, percussive scream. Leah's mind went blank with terror. But as Dante exchanged fire, she saw one of the gunmen go down, clutching his leg. He wasn't dead. He was fumbling in his pocket, pulling out a phone, calling for backup. Dante was pinned down by the second attacker. Sal, their driver, was providing cover from the car, but he couldn't see the wounded man in the shadows. A cold, clear thought cut through Leah's panic. He can't make that call. She didn't know where the impulse came from. It was pure survival instinct, raw and brutal. She scrambled on her hands and knees, staying low. The wounded man grunted in surprise as she appeared beside him. Before he could react, she kicked the phone from his grasp. It skittered across the grimy floor. He cursed, reaching for it. Leah kicked again, this time aiming for his hand. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that was quickly swallowed by another volley of gunfire. The second gunman fell. Silence descended, thick and ringing. The air smelled of cordite and fear. Dante walked over, his weapon still lowered, his eyes scanning the darkness. He looked down at the man clutching his shattered hand, then at Leah, who was trembling, her face pale. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His gaze was heavy with a new, startling understanding. He reached down, pulled her to her feet, and pushed her into the car. Back in a different safe house. A sleek, modern townhome this time. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a shaky, nauseating hollowness. Leah couldn't stop seeing the man's face, couldn't stop hearing the sound of his bones breaking. She had crossed a line. She had stepped out of the audience and onto the stage, and the role she had played was violent. Dante poured her a glass of water, his movements steady. He stood before her, not with anger or pity, but with that same cold, appraising respect she'd seen in the garage. "You understand," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion he had reached, a fact he was stating. Leah looked at her hands, half expecting to see them covered in blood. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Her silence was a confession. It admitted a truth she hadn't known about herself until 10 minutes ago. When pushed, she was capable of a brutality that mirrored his own. They both knew it. In that moment of shared, violent clarity, the ground between them shifted forever. The Falcons, enraged by their failed ambush, changed tactics. They couldn't get to Dante, so they went for what they perceived as his weakness. They went after her. They must have been watching her apartment since the night at the restaurant. One of Dante's men, sent to quietly clear out her belongings, found the message they had left. Dante told her that night. His voice was flat, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, a sign of a deeply buried fury. "They went to your apartment. They left something on the doorstep for you." "What?" she whispered. "A dead canary," he said, "in a little cage." The image was so grotesque, so symbolic, it made her feel sick. It was a message for him, sent via the shell of her old life. "We know who she is. We know where to find her." He saw the news as confirmation that his decision to keep her with him was the correct one. "You see," he said, his voice tight, "this is why you must stay. I am the only one who can protect you." But Leah heard something different. She looked at this man, at the violence that clung to him like a second skin, and saw the truth with blinding clarity. She thought staying had been the safe choice, a calculated risk. Now she realized there was no safety with him. He wasn't her shield. He was a magnet for the very danger she was trying to escape. Being near him wasn't protection. It was a death sentence with a better view. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and the lock had just been thrown. The revelation that her association with Dante was the source of her danger, not the solution to it, settled in Leah's bones like a permanent chill. The canary in the cage was a message she couldn't ignore. She was no longer just a witness. She was a target. Dante's response was not to hide. It was to attack. The war with the Falcons escalated, moving from the shadows into a brutal, open conflict. Dante became a ghost, constantly moving, his meetings held in the back of moving cars or in warehouses that smelled of rust and decay. Leah moved with him, a silent passenger in his violent world. She learned to sleep in strange beds and to wake at the slightest unfamiliar sound. The breaking point came when Marco Falcone, the head of the rival family, requested a sit-down, a truce. Dante knew it was a lie. A man like Falcone didn't offer peace unless it was a prelude to a final, devastating betrayal. It was a trap, but it was one Dante had to walk into. To refuse would be a sign of weakness he could not afford. The meeting was set for a neutral location, an old, decommissioned subway station beneath the city, a place of ghosts and echoes. Dante's men swept it, planned for it, secured every entrance and exit they could find. He intended to leave Leah behind in their latest safe house, locked down with Sal. "You will stay here," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No," Leah said, her voice quiet but firm. She had been studying the blueprints of the station that Dante had left on the table. She saw things differently than his men did. They saw tactical positions, sight lines, and choke points. She saw how a place was used. "You're all looking at the main platform, the official entrances. But this was a working station. There has to be a maintenance access tunnel, one that connects to the sewer system or an old utility line. Something not on the official city plans." She pointed to a spot on the blueprint. "Here, this ventilation shaft. It looks like a dead end, but it's too close to the old aqueduct system. I'll bet there's a ladder, a way in, and a way out that your men haven't found." Dante stared at the blueprint, then at her. He made a call. 10 minutes later, his underboss confirmed it. There was an old, rusted access point, almost completely hidden by debris. A weakness, a back door for an ambush. "I'm going," Leah said. "You need another set of eyes. Someone they won't be looking for. I can get into a position to see that access point. I can be your warning." He wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him to lock her away where she was safe. But he looked at her, at the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and he remembered the garage. He remembered his brother, Luca, who had died for a lack of exactly this kind of paranoid foresight. He gave a single, sharp nod. At the station, the air was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and decay. Leah, dressed in dark clothes, was positioned by one of Dante's men in a darkened ticketing booth overlooking the main platform. She had a direct view of the maintenance tunnel entrance. Dante and his men took their positions below. Marco Falcone arrived with his entourage, all false smiles and tense shoulders. The air crackled. The two bosses began to talk, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. Leah kept her eyes glued to the dark opening of the tunnel. But as the minutes ticked by, nothing happened. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. The trap wasn't coming from where she expected. She forced herself to look away from the tunnel and scan the entire scene. She watched Dante's men. They were perfectly positioned, alert, loyal, all except one, a capo named Rossi. He was standing slightly behind Dante, at his right hand. He was supposed to be watching Falcone's men, but his eyes kept flicking to Dante, and his hand, just like the gunman at the bar all those weeks ago, was twitching. He was nervous, too nervous. The betrayal wasn't coming from the Falcones. It was coming from within. Leah's heart pounded. She had no way to communicate, no way to warn him. She had to do something. Her eyes darted around the booth and landed on an old, red fire alarm box on the wall. It was a relic, probably disconnected for decades. But it was a chance. Without a second thought, she pulled the lever. Nothing happened for a second. Then, a deafening, clanging bell began to ring throughout the station. An ear-splitting, chaotic noise. Everyone flinched. In that split second of confusion, Rossi made his move, his hand going for his gun. But the alarm had broken his focus and, more importantly, it had drawn Dante's attention. Dante saw the movement, the flicker of betrayal in his capo's eyes. The explosion of violence was swift and surgical. Dante moved with lethal precision. It was over in seconds. The Falcones, their own plan disrupted by the internal chaos, retreated in disarray. Silence fell once more, broken only by the fading echo of the alarm bell. In the aftermath, back at the penthouse, the city lights seemed colder, sharper. The threat was over, the betrayal excised like a cancer. But the cost was steep. Trust within Dante's organization was shattered. He would have to rebuild, and the process would be bloody. He found Leah by the window. He didn't thank her. Words like that were meaningless between them now. He simply came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the darkness. He reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The gesture was slow, filled with a reverence that stole her breath. "You see things," he said, his voice rough. "You see me." It was the most profound confession he could make. He wasn't talking about Rossi or the tunnel. He was talking about the man behind the mask, the wound he carried, the darkness he lived in. She saw it all and she hadn't run. He let his hand fall. Rossi had a wife, he said, his voice flat, factual. She will be taken care of. A debt is paid. He was not seeking her approval or her forgiveness. He was stating a law of his universe. He walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of wine, the deep red catching the light. He brought one to her, his fingers brushing against hers as she took it. Leah looked not at him, but at their reflection in the dark window. A man carved from shadows and a woman who had discovered a darkness in herself she never knew existed. She saw the truth of what they were, standing together against the indifferent lights of the city. Her old life was a ghost. Her future was an unknown territory mapped by violence and loyalty. She raised the glass to her lips, the cool rim a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. She took a sip, the wine rich and bitter on her tongue. She did not look away from their reflection. She was no longer a witness. She was part of the picture, and she was choosing to stay.